hello, Sophia, for the third time today.
Hi again. Yes, it is. I'm back again.
Nice to see you. You've got a panel, but I'm going to let you introduce the what the topic is and your brilliant guests. So thank you very much, and see you in a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stuart. So yes, I'm just going to get myself quickly set up here so I can see your lovely chat, because I do want you to throw in any question, not any questions, throw in, just keep the chat flowing. Basically, we're going to be having a chat here, so keep chatting with us in the chat function. And of course there is the Q&A, so make use of that to throw in your questions, because at the end I'll be coming back to ask all our lovely panelists a range of questions. Hi Julian, see, using the chat as requested. Perfect. And of course use the subtitles and closed captioning if they are of use to you. But yes, I've got a full squadron of panelists here, so yeah, let me introduce the panel to everyone, and then I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. So today we're going to be talking, entitled The Perfect Storm, identifying the best time to connect with publishers. So looking at all things to do with publishing from different angles, what makes, what will help you get success in this market, and what does the market look like at the moment, amongst a range of other issues. My name is Sophia Aubrey-Drake. I'm sure anyone who's been here knows exactly who I am. I am obviously host, moderator, all those sorts of things, and mainly known for the Big Indie Pitch and helping promote independent developers around the world on mobile, PC, console, XR, all platforms really. So yeah, that's me. But let's let the panelists introduce themselves. So I'm going to go in the order that I've got you on my screen, which might differ from the order you've got. So Cassia, let's start with you.
Hello, hi. I'm Cassia. I run Curran Games Agency, through which I help multiple indie game studios find publishers and investors. And I also am an advisor to various funds and incubators, including Astra Fund and also Wings Interactive.
Fantastic. And next up is Theo.
Thanks, Sophia. Great to be here. So I'm Theo. I've been working at Voodoo for 2.5 years now, and I'm in charge of publishing at the Paris office. So working on a daily basis with studios all around the globe to help them publish as many great hits as possible.
Fantastic. And next up is Josh.
Hey everyone, I'm Josh, and I run Eastside Games. I'm the co-founder, and I think my title is now GM of game studios at Leaf Mobile. We've been making games for 10 years, and we've been publishing games for about 2 or 3 years now. So here to share what that's like to co-dev.
Fantastic. And next up is Des.
Hello everybody, I'm Des Gayle, and I run production for a indie publisher called Fellow Traveller. We focus on story first narrative experiences. I am also on the BAFTA Games Committee and a UK board member, and I think that's all the interesting stuff.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Hickey. I focus on mobile for Devolver Digital. We're an indie publishing label, has been doing games for the better part of 12 years, and looking forward to chatting with you all. Also, Josh, I like your t-shirt.
Fantastic. Right, well, let's get started with, I think, sort of like a broad icebreaker question at the moment. So to start with, and I'll let anyone jump in as and when, but later on I might pick on specific individuals to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. But yeah, how competitive is the publishing scene right now, especially within like the indie market? I mean, does anyone have anything they'd like to say about the level of competition in the market? Who's going to go first? Who have I got? Des, you've unmuted. You're up first.
It depends who you speak to. I mean, I've got loads of developer friends who say they can't get a deal yet, so it's not quite competitive enough. But no, I think that definitely from our side of things, it is quite competitive. What's good at the moment is we're all quite friendly with each other, and it's always interesting when you get so far down the line of a developer and then, like, you know, they say, oh, actually, we decide to go with someone else. You're always trying to play like Cluedo, trying to work out who it could be. And then obviously like 6 to 9 months later, you're like, okay, you guys got that one. Yeah, but it's nice. It's nicely competitive. Like, it's not like we're, cannibalizing each other, because I think what's a good thing at the minute is that we've all, or most of us, have got like a very clear definition of what we're looking for, which is a great asset for devs, right? Because they don't have to waste their time, shotgunning all their applications. But yeah, that's what I reckon.
I think you make a really interesting point there about like a lot of publishers, especially in the market, and what I'm going to touch upon after, which maybe it comes into that, is how publishing's changed. But I think you are right there in that a lot of publishers have an identity, and even if those who maybe you don't think, there's a good chance they're searching for that identity and that area in the market. Let me pick on someone. Let's go to you, Josh. What are your thoughts on competition in the publishing scene right now? Do you think it's a great space for opportunity, or do you think it's one where actually there's maybe too much competition and it's really difficult to find cool games because other people have snatched them?
yeah, there can't be too much competition. I mean, we were a game developer, we still are, and we've been, we were a indie game developer for years, and I wish there was this many publishers around. Kind of when we were starting out, we chose the self-publishing route, and that wasn't always the easiest one. So I don't think there can be too many publishers around. If you're a game developer, you should shop around and make sure you find somebody that fits your, I think you're finding more developers now matching themselves with companies that match their core culture, their values, who they want to work with, which is kind of before that wasn't really the case. And there's many different models of it as well. Like, we don't focus on traditional publishing at Eastside Games. We're kind of like publisher light. We call it co-development, and there's lots of other people that do co-development as well. So we work along with the teams to build something together, and we're looking for a very specific type of game, very specific type of studio. And so what I think it's great is, if you're a game developer, shop around and work with as many different publishers at Pocket Gamer as you can, and they're all different stages too. Some people look for games that are already completed and then want to do growth publishing. Some people want to work with you on integration from the get-go, especially on the ad monetization front. And then for us, we want to work with you sort of from the very beginning to make sure that we build something that is long tail and we're still supporting game 4 or 5 years down the road. So it's good news. And I think the more publishers out there, that's better choices for developers. And in the ecosystem, the developers are the most important person because they are making the content.
Yeah, and I do want to say to anyone, just dive in at any point if you want. You don't have to wait for me to pick on you. But in the spirit of that, I am going to ask Cassia, just keeping on the same topic. Is this something, because obviously you have a unique position in that you're helping connect those developers to, maybe some of the people we see here and other publishers. Is the number a strength, or can it sometimes become quite difficult connecting people necessarily to the right people, but also making sure that they gain that success in a publishing deal?
So it is great that there are so many publishers available to developers now. So there's about 250 publishers, roughly, if you're talking on the PC and console side, and mobile even more. But I think the flip side of this, looking at it from the developer point of view, is that on average, a publisher will receive something between 1,000 and 2,000 pitches a year for like the most high profile publishers, at least. So you have like a lot of competition in a strange way. The games industry, the games market continues to grow. So just as there are more publishers and more developers, there's also more players who are wanting to spend more money. So right now it's still like a good and healthy ecosystem. But yeah, it is like very time consuming struggle for developers to find the right publishers or like the right fit, because there are so many different types of publishers, not always easy to find the one that's a really good fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, Theo, give you a chance to jump in, but interestingly, based on what Cassia said, yeah, if you're inundated with so many games coming in, I mean, obviously that's a big strength for the market, but you know, how do you feel about like the fact that you can only take on so many of them?
I think Josh said something earlier that resonated with me, was this idea of like finding the right fit. Like to Cassia's point, there's a ton of different options out there for people to go and pitch their games to. And so, you know, it's not just a question of finding the right game, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's people on both sides. It's people on the developer side, it's people on the publisher side. And so hopefully, you know, there's a cultural fit, a personality fit that is healthy enough that you can work together for the duration of a project and beyond, especially in the world of live service and live ops, where launch day is really just day one. There's no question that things are hotter than they've ever been. I mean, there's every signal is coming from the market, from just the sheer number of games that are launching every day. There's more and more games that are available on a daily basis. There are more and more press releases coming out saying this or that company is now moving to be a publisher as well. You know, M&A is going crazy. You know, Embracer, Stillfront Group, and so forth are buying up companies all over the place. So I think all of those are key sort of signals that there's consolidation happening. There are people sort of taking, you know, the number 1, number 2, number 3 spots and so forth, and becoming deeply entrenched and harder to displace. And so for sure, like, competition is across the board. And I think that, you know, the downside of that is that, like it or not, some people will be forced to exit. But then the upside of it is that it's you know, it sort of forces everybody across the board to up their game and increase the level of production value, the depth of the experiences, the innovation, in order to keep, you know, being able to stand out amongst an increasingly crowded field of players.
Yeah, is that how you feel as well, Theo?
Absolutely, I definitely agree with Josh's points when he said that there's no such thing as too much competition, because competition is the best way to drive innovation. And as a publisher, you need to innovate in order to survive, and that can benefit both publishers and developers. Because to go back to the point about, you know, this overpopulation of developers, or maybe games or pitches to look at, if let's say that Voodoo was the only publisher on the market, we wouldn't have the same volume issue, right? The fact that there are so many publishers out there now, it pushes you to rethink and reconsider your working process and your publishing process, to make sure that you can address as many of those pitches as possible. Maybe looking at different criteria, assessing performance and potential in a different way. And I think that that's making the market move in the right direction, and maybe give their chance to more games, more pitches, and more developers who wouldn't have had it in a different setting.
Yeah, and as anyone will know, so moving on, as anyone will know who's watched one of my talks or been a part of my panel of mine or a fireside chat, I love actionable things that people can take away. So in the spirit of what we've been talking about, accepting that there is a massive amount of competition, not just in the publishing scene, but also, you know, in the number of developers that there are to pick from. What advice would any of you give to developers in terms of when the right time to be reaching out to publishers is? I mean, is there a sweet spot? Is there a too early, too late? And, you know, and sort of when you're doing it, sort of how much should you have ready to show?
Well, I'd say on the PC and console side, like the majority of publishers will want to see a vertical slice or prototype at this stage. Like, unless you come straight from like a AAA sort of studio background with a whole team of like really experienced people, you're really unlikely to land a publishing deal just on the basis of the concept. And because publishers are getting literally thousands of pitches a year, it just means that the bar is that much higher in order for you to get there. And generally the thought is that anyone could have a good idea, but whether that game idea is actually fun and good in practice, you can only really see that through like a prototype or a advanced vertical slice. I would say publishers kind of vary quite a lot in terms of how fully polished they would want a vertical slice to be. Some are okay with like a bit more of like a bare bones prototype. Some will want to see like really like swish vertical slice. But I also think that varies a little bit depending upon the kind of game genre that you're making as well, because for some sort of game genres, like maybe like some strategy games, for example, you can get away with not having very good art. But then for anything that's kind of more narrative or atmosphere driven, story driven, you probably do want to have that kind of atmosphere all locked in through like a polished vertical slice. So that's generally my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that mirror the panel, the rest of the panel? Does anyone else have anything to add?
I don't know what else there is to say after such a comprehensive and accurate answer. I mean, at least a lot of what Cassia just said reflects what some of my experience or some of our experience has been, because we do get something on the order of like 2,000 proposals a year. And so for sure, I had this written down actually before we started the panel, is like, find the fun, right? Like whether that means a vertical slice, or maybe it's a prototype, or maybe it's a concept, whatever it is, for sure, code that you can touch and feel goes miles further than anything on paper. Provided, I mean, I'll say the exception to that rule is maybe if that concept or that pitch is coming from a team you've worked with before, and they've proven themselves, and and there's trust established, and there's a healthy working relationship and so forth. Maybe you greenlight something off of a paper pitch, but otherwise, generally speaking, I think that a demo, in whatever form it takes, it proves two things. One, it needs to prove the fun, but two, it proves that the developer has skin in the game, and they have committed themselves, and they've pursued some path beyond a PowerPoint presentation or beyond some market research that shows they have a vision, and that's something that they can execute against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone? Yeah.
Sorry.
No, please go. I was just going to ask if anyone else had any thoughts. So yeah, please go, Josh.
The old vertical slice, it just brings that fear, at the back of your neck, to think like you have so much stuff to do before GDC, and everyone that's been there knows that we thought we'd get to mobile games and we wouldn't have it anymore. But it's more true than ever that you have to really have something other than a concept, something that's playable, something that makes sense. And another thing that we look for when we're getting developers to work with us on IdleKit or one of our technologies is also taking our existing game and thinking of another way that you can make a new version of that game as well. That's another great way that we can work with developers to bring them in. So I think if you're a developer out there and you're thinking about what you could do, or maybe you don't have the resources to make that vertical slice, one of the things you can do is even figure out a way to just like mock it up with the publisher's existing game and figure out how you can do that. We've seen great mock-ups that actually work and play in everything from PowerPoint to actually people bringing the project over and working it. But they really have to have an understanding on how it works. And I think as a developer, sometimes you get too down the rabbit hole of thinking my big thought has a lot of value. But we all know in games, as soon as you put it out in the market, if it's really good, a lot of people are going to make a similar type of game. So you have to be able to move fast anyway. So before you talk to a publisher, you really have to nail that down, so like what you're making, what your roadmap, and how that all works, because they can't figure that stuff out for you.
Yeah, Theo, Des, I can see you. Boy, you both unmuted. So who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Des. All right, I'll start. Yeah. Our approach at Voodoo is really to encourage studios and developers to get in touch with a publisher, and us ideally, of course, as soon as possible, because you can have a great idea, but without maybe the right guidance or tools or just partnerships, you can really miss out on something really big. So I completely agree with Josh that you need to have an idea or a basic prototype that is quite fleshed out to make sure that you don't waste any time. But you can't waste too much time, trying to get the perfect product for that, because if you're too afraid to fail, it's not going to work for you, at least in the hype casual industry, because you're going to have to fail before you succeed. And the only worst thing than failing is actually missing out on something more. Plus, at Voodoo, we don't work with games specifically. We work with teams and individuals. So we look beyond the first metrics or the first prototype that you show us. If we see potential in in your mindset, in the idea, in just like the level and quality of execution, we're going to want to keep working with you, even if we don't publish the prototype that you just pitched us. So my answer would be as soon as possible, all the time.
And Des, did you have anything to add? I know you wanted to jump
Theo
in
covered
before.
it. Sorry.
Great. Well, interestingly, on that point that you mentioned, Theo, and a lot of other people raised, I think one of the things that's always interesting, and I see different approaches in my role as leading the big indie pitch, and I'd love to get your thoughts, is to any, indie or mid-tier developer, who's looking for publishing potentially as part of their roadmap. Do you think they should identify, do you think developers should identify whether they want to secure a publisher from the start and develop based on that idea? So, for example, saying, oh, well, we won't do this unless we get a developer. Or do you think that you should develop within your constraints and adapt if the opportunity arises through your pitching? What do you think is the sort of the all or nothing, I need a publisher approach, or the sort of we can scale if we are in a position to gain a publisher? What would you advise to a developer who has a great concept of these sort of options? I'll come to you first, Des, since give you the opportunity to give your thoughts on this one first before everyone else jumps in.
Yeah, this is a good one. Like, so I just go for a slight tangent. I had a heated discussion with a friend of mine because a whole bunch of us were struggling getting funding, and his argument was just make something that is easy for publishers to sign, right? Like there's certain trends before trends that you can spot. Let's just make this type of game, and then that kind of bleeds into like, well, look at what the publisher's done before and pitch that type of game. I was on the side of, well, yeah, sure, you could do that, but I think a big part of making video games is like you love doing it, and if you're making something like as a means to an end rather than what you actually want to create, when you get into the fourth quarter, because like it's always horrible when you get there, making games is tough, and if you don't love it, it's just going to make it more and more difficult for you to finish. So I definitely don't suggest doing that. Specifically to the question, it's about scope, right? So if you're a mid-tier team, like you suggest, depending on finances, right? You should be making a concept that kind of you could get as far as you can on your own. But then on the flip side of that, like everyone's got dreams, right? So if you want to make a multi-million-dollar game and that's not in the bank, then you have to think about a publisher or an investor or whatever external money you need up front. Yeah, like you'd make a decision at the start of the type of game you're making. I wouldn't go, this is plan A if we don't have a publisher, this is plan B if we do. They kind of, they're two very different things. And just to finish, what about actionable advice? Whenever you're pitching a game, like don't come to us with like an a la carte menu. That won't work because we're just like, well, what's the game you want to make? Is it this one or this one? Or even if you're crazy, do 3 options. The exception that I would add, like, is DLC, right? You can do the main game and then give us options for DLC if you want. But don't come with too many options. There's no point.
Yeah, and Mark, I can see you've unmuted. That's my sign to bring you in.
Thanks, Sophia. I think that the words "it depends" are going to be repeated a lot because, well, it depends. I think that one of the things that's important is sort of being realistic and honest with oneself on what is within a team or a person's area of expertise and what can they reasonably handle and do a good job with versus what do they not know how to do and would really benefit from partnering with someone who can bring to bear expertise that they simply don't have the bandwidth for, because the reality is a publisher is not cheap, right? They're going to take a significant piece of your revenue, and you got to make sure that you're getting real, tangible, meaningful value in exchange for what you're giving up in revenue. So, if a team doesn't know how to do marketing, whether that's brand or performance based, they're very different. right? Do they know how to do UA? Is there any sort of expertise from a live ops standpoint? Or is there anything with regard to like analytics-based decision making? Something that's hugely important for any free-to-play game, right? Are you equipped to do QA? Are you equipped for loc? What if your game hits it big and like you need the legal support to make sure you're trademarked everywhere so nobody infringes on your stuff? Are you equipped for all the back of house accounting and reconciliation and taking care of all the payments and things like that? A publisher can do all of those things for you. And so if you're not equipped to take care of those things yourself, then yeah, you'd probably do well to partner with somebody. But the more, I think the more, especially as far as indies are concerned, the more you can sort of handle yourself, then probably the better deal you can negotiate. So there's definitely a balance that needs to be struck.
Yeah. Now, anyone else want to jump in with any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, to Mark's point, I think the question that studios and developers should ask themselves when considering a partnership is just, okay, what's the risk, and then compare that with the alternative of self-publishing a game. Usually, the risk of going with a publisher, at least for your first game, is very low. The only one that I see is maybe making less than if you self-publish it. The risk of actually self-publishing it is actually maybe missing out on something much bigger, because you wouldn't have had the partnership with different ad networks, or just the guidance, the expertise that enables you to scale a game to your charts and maintain it there for a long time. And I think a good proof of that the value that a publisher brings to a studio and a developer, goes beyond just helping with monetization and stuff like that, is that most of the hits that we publish, they actually come from studios that make hits repeatedly. And the fact that they keep publishing these hits with us instead of just self-publishing, because they're not bound to us. We have a lot of studios who don't work exclusively with us, yet they keep prototyping and publishing with us just because they see that value that we bring to the table, and they ask themselves that question: okay, what's my risk? And the risk usually is so low, at least much lower than the alternative, that they just go with it.
Yeah. Josh, I can see you've unmuted. Yeah.
One of the pieces of advice I like to give to people looking at this, or indie developers, is also don't just assume because you have a publisher they're going to handle everything business to do with your studio. I know you love making games, but if you're in this for your profession, you're going to have to learn about the business of making games. And so you can't just throw that over the fence, and you can't just find a consultant and you can't just say, hey, Cassia, you take care of all this for me. I don't want to do that, because you have to know about your own business. And what's really important about knowing about your own business is also about the type of publisher you want and the length of publishing. So there's some publishers that can help you do the growth stage and get out there and maybe give you funding to start your game. And then after you're live, there's some decisions you have to make. Do you have the team that can continue to do live ops, and do you want to continue working on this game? And if it's successful and you want to continue working on this game, maybe after a while you do want to find a publisher that can actually just take over the game and continue to work on it, and then you could still get revenue from that and you could work on your next game. So these are all decisions you have to make. So it's also important to be to go back to the earlier question, is when you should look for a publisher. You should probably start looking now, even if you don't need one 6 months in the future, so you can just find the different types of teams you kind of want to work with, and those in the future if something lines up. And then when you get something, say you have a team of 10 and 2 people make this great idea out of the main game for a great hyper casual, you can hit up Voodoo and say, hey, what do you think about this? Maybe we can do this as a game. And that's kind of the business of running your game studio, is you have to look at the own opportunities within your own game studio to last and to know what's coming up next. And so you have to get out there and meet people, eventually in person, but now it's pretty easy over the computer, but eventually in person you'll have to get out there and meet people, and you may or may not shake hands in the future, but you'll at least have to give them a business card of some sort, do that sort of thing again.
Yeah, Cassia, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to this.
I think it's mostly been said already, but yeah, I think definitely what Des was saying about scope, I think is really important. I think there's Marcus is right as well about there's like pros and cons about going with a publisher or investor. If you're wanting to sort of pump up your game, you have to think about it from like a business decision completely. I think just making sure that you do your research and making that decision about whether you want to aim for a publisher or an investor and have that larger scope, or whether you'd rather keep it small and then keep all the knowledge, keep all the revenues, central revenues for yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, the next thing I'd like to touch upon briefly, and it's not to be negative, it's just to make sure that all avenues, you know, are explored, and to deal sometimes with the situation that maybe some developers, especially indies, will find themselves in is, you know, we're talking about the best time to connect with publishers, but in terms of timing, you know, well, first of all, is self-publishing still a viable option for independent developers in the current market, competitive market that we're in? And if so, you know, when is the best time to sort of call it and say, okay, you know, maybe the publishers aren't interested, but I still believe in this project. I'm gonna carry on to self-publish it. Or equally, the best time to say, okay, the publishers aren't into this, I'm going to take the advice I've got and move on to a new project. I mean, you know, basically, how much persistence, you know, is there in it before you decide maybe it's time to move on, and within that, is self-publishing a viable option still? If I start with Josh, if I come to you first, just picking at random.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think the other question you have to ask is, if you do self-publish, when is it time to call it quits? Because we've also seen that quite a bit, and we've been in that situation a lot of times where you just continue to work on a game and hope it will succeed because it's your passion project and you want to make it, and you just keep pouring money into it, and it's really hard to grow that game and it's really hard to get out there. I think that's one of the things you really have to plan in your business plan before you get started, about how much runway you have, how long you're going to work this and get this out, and what are your growth targets in order for it to be a viable business. And I think you just have to look at that revenue. So the mistake we see more often than not with most developers is a lot of developers are looking for a publisher because they're out of money, and that makes sense. But also now when you launch a game in mobile, you should have 3 to 6 months of runway of development time to actually grow and launch that game and work with it in the live ops model. And if you're not able to do that, I would say a good viable option for that is to look at some of the curated games that go along with the platforms on Google and Apple, and look at maybe making a game that way if you're not quite ready to make the jump and to do that sort of live ops budgeting, because that's a big endeavor. You got to have some, I think, experience on your team now in order to do that. And I would say it's not impossible, but it's definitely a lot harder than, we just had our 10-year anniversary, and it wasn't easy 10 years ago, but it's a lot harder now than 10 years ago to launch a game and be like, to even be like, wow, we got, well, you know, a couple thousand installs on the first day. That's great. Now let's look at the data. It's pretty hard now. You have to have a target of working closely with the platforms for discovery, your own growth UA, your own organic UA and organic growth channels, and then growth coming from existing cross promotion as well. If you don't have any of that in your network, it's pretty hard to self-publish, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say is just get some, that's a good way that you can get something out there quickly, launch it in the store, then you could fire that to any person here and say, here you go, this is what my game is, play it. And if they play it and they think it's fun, it's like, oh, can you make another one, but maybe space theme? That would be great. And that's another great way you can get your foot in the door. Like a finished game goes way better than a pitch deck.
Yeah, and on this point, because I think I might be wrong, but we'll play this theory out into practice. I wonder if there is a difference between the mobile market and the PC console market in this respect. So I'd like to stick with the, like go to Theo here, and do your experiences mirror what Josh is saying?
To some extent, it does. I think the choice is not that binary, because you can, of course, you can't self-publish and publish with a publisher at the same time. But through the lifetime of a game, you can actually do both. You can either start self-publishing, and it's going to catch the attention of a lot of publishers, and then you're going to publish it with them, or the other way around. You're going to publish it with someone. Maybe it's not going to work as well as what the publisher or the studio was expecting, and game is going to be released back to the studio. But Josh raised a very important point: is that all the time and effort you're going to have to invest in doing your own UA, a growing game, making it available to as many people as possible, is something to be considered. And also you need to realize, as a studio or a developer, that all the time that you spend trying to self-publish your game is time that you won't be spending actually improving your product or thinking about another idea. So it's all about finding the right balance and realizing where you're at, which stage you're at in terms of creativity and motivation. If you feel like whatever you do, you're not going to have great ideas, or you're not going to find new ideas to improve your product, then it might make more sense to try to self-publish your game. If you're confident into your ability of shipping out more and more cool ideas, then it makes much more sense to get the help of a publisher.
Yeah, Des, Mark, Cassia, I can see you've unmuted. Jump in.
I think we're actually on the PC and console side, you can do something a bit similar to what Theo and Josh are saying about getting your game out. Typically, I think that PC and console games, they do need that kind of extra funding to get to the final to be launched compared to mobile games. But with what you can do if you have like a PC and console game that you're developing is essentially like try doing something like a Kickstarter. The reason why your game might not be picked up by a publisher is perhaps there's a problem with the hook problem. Perhaps it's just really difficult for a publisher to validate whether it be successful or not. And so if you start sort of market testing the game with like a demo on the actual public via Kickstarter, and not using the Kickstarter per se as a way to raise money to finish a game, but using a sort of this kind of event or as a way to attract the attention of a publisher, that sometimes works for some developers. Like some developers are making games in really kind of historically not successful on PC and console platforms such as like Match 3, but have been able to validate the fact that there is an audience for it by doing a successful Kickstarter. So that's one option, and having like your Steam page up and just seeing what kind of like organic wish list you're getting. If you actually do have really good organic wish lists, you sort of take that to a publisher that rejects you and pass, say, hey, look, we've got we are getting traction from players. There's genuine interest. So you actually so please take a look at the look. Yeah, market testing, like actually putting your game out there in some format can give you that second chance.
Yeah. Mark or Des, anything to add?
It's a tough question for sure, because a lot of these projects are people's babies, right? They're passion projects. They're the result of people's dreams, and it's not easy to you can't just nonchalantly turn your back on that, right? But the truth of the matter is, people aren't just trying to pursue their dreams, they're also trying to build successful businesses. And so I think there are truths, and there's definitely platform specific nuance, but whether you're trying to get after Steam or you want to go up for mobile, for sure there are like validation signals, there are validation gates for you to cross. If one of the gates you try to cross is to go the publisher route and you're not getting any commitments, well, that's a pretty strong indicator that people who consider themselves experts in the space don't think that this product is viable. That doesn't necessarily mean it's time to shut it all down, but there is a time when you have to sort of be honest with yourself and admit when good money starts being thrown after bad. I think it's possible to go out and it's not, I don't think it's fair to only focus on how competitive the market is. One of the amazing realities about being a developer today is that these channels are open. All you got to do is sign up. It used to be that wasn't an option. And so it is possible to put a game out onto the App Store, or put it out on Google Play, do a very small UA campaign and get some users in, collect some data, and then maybe with that data that shows I do have solid retention, I do have solid engagement, I do have people playing multiple times per day. I'm getting positive feedback from forums, or maybe it's on Itch.io or whatever, wherever it is. There is, a huge variety of channels available out there today, which is amazing as a resource to developers to hear from an unbiased audience what they think of this thing that they're trying to make. So maybe once you get some some data that validates the vision for a project, it can make sense to take the demo or the prototype and pair that with data, and then go back to the publisher and say, hey, what now? Or maybe the data itself proves that with scale and by additional funding, there is a way to build this thing towards something successful. So, but as we've said in response to a lot of the questions, it depends. And I think it takes a lot of self-reflection about how much investment starts to put the company at risk. Because eventually, if you want to work on, the next project, it would be wise to know when it's time to, move on.
Yeah, and Des, anything to add? It's fine if you don't.
I was just going to say, knowing when to knife the baby is an extremely difficult skill. And it doesn't matter if you're indie or AAA, people mess that up all the time. I've worked on games that some of the team decide this isn't going to work, but it goes on for another year, X number of millions. You're like, oh, okay, cool. But what I will say, just to add something that Mark said, just to add, when you're pitching your game and you get no's, it's not always you or your game. Sometimes our rosters fill up, sometimes it's too expensive. The whole sentiment here is just to listen, take that feedback and work out what it is. And then, like we said before, maybe you can rescope the game. Maybe like Mark said, you can ice it for a bit and just do something else. Yeah. What do we say? It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. You might not even have to kill it. You might have to, like you say, just put it on ice, come back to it at a better time, maybe when you've got more resources or something. I'm going to ask, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm quickly going to ask the question we've got in the Q&A, and then I'm going to come back and ask you one quick question that's, I'm going to look for a sentence answer, the quick fire question. But you can all see it in the Q&A, so I won't read it all just to make sure we can get through it. But essentially, Julian is a business developer who pitches projects all the time and says, for now, we're working on a pitch and scale format, which is more secure regarding risk management. Risk management for either you and us between the right time of the vertical slice and the third part of the pitch and the scale process. Basically, what Julian's wondering is, what are your thoughts on that way of working with a pitch and scale format? You don't all have to jump in. I know you can all see it because it's a bit of a longer one rather than me read it out. You can see it in the Q&A. Does anyone have any input on this?
I'm not entirely sure what pitch and scale format is, so I think it's quite hard to comment.
I think maybe if I'm understanding it correctly, it's like V1, like day one launch product, and then a post-launch roadmap and how to scale that up. I think this is a very free-to-play specific question. Perhaps there are cases for DLC business model, but I think generally speaking, anybody who's positions themselves as a pro in the free-to-play space, which isn't Devolver, to be quite frank, But that being said, I spent 5 years on the App Store team at Apple, and just from the variety of interactions with publishers and companies there, is that absolutely having some plan for the future for a free-to-play game, I wouldn't say is a nice to have. I'd go as far as saying it's almost an essential to have at least some kind of vision. I don't know to what extent it needs to be, have a milestone schedule built against it and deliverables and dates and budgets, but certainly having some intelligent answer to what happens on D30 and beyond is, I think, a must-have for a serious somebody trying to make a serious free-to-play game.
I suppose as Julian's thrown in the chat is basically talking about funding different parts of the process separately. Were you going to address that, Des?
Yeah, so I can say so. So if I understand this bit, so you mean like get the prototype funded by one entity and then production by someone else, etc. Sometimes that can work, but it depends on the terms. So obviously money's not free. So whoever's coming in second or third, well, you probably don't want a third person, but if that deal only gets done if those terms on the first set of money isn't prohibitive. So there's some prototype funds out there where they want money from your revenues afterwards. Now, I'm not talking about Fellow Traveller specifically here, but I know full well that if any publisher has those terms, they'll be like, okay, great, but what you owe them comes out of your cut. So no, we don't care. If you can still live on whatever, that probably end up like 5 or 6% at that point, fine. But it's very rare to see or if Devolver size something, if they want the prototype, I guarantee you they would want us to buy out whatever their investment was to carry that on. Yeah. If I've understood you, Julian.
Yeah, and I suppose we can continue on the chat in other areas like Discord and stuff. I'm just conscious of time. I know we've run over ever so slightly, but I did promise I will end on one final question, and I'm going to ask everyone to give it a quick one. It's going to be difficult, but if you could offer sort of like a headline piece of advice to a developer out there watching who wants to gain a publishing deal, maybe with yourselves or a different publisher, what would be the one thing you would love to say to them? Please remember this, keep this in mind.
You can pitch to multiple publishers at the same time and their feelings won't be hurt.
That's great. I love that one. Yeah.
That's
a great one.
Whatever the outcome, you're going to learn a lot from this.
Yeah, always learn. I think that's great. Des?
Pay attention to label fit.
Yeah. Josh, Mark, I can see you've unmuted first.
Des, you stole mine. No, make sure, certainly understand who you're pitching to.
Yeah, and Josh, the last word to you.
Yeah, it's a long game, so if you really want to look for a publisher, you're going to have to get good at business development, and business development is a long game. So start going to shows now and talking to people now for funding your project. That's 3, 6, 2 years down the road to find that right fit.
Yeah, and I suppose if I was to add something that only just came to mind when you said it, Josh, and we didn't have a chance to go on to it, is I would say don't never underestimate the importance of networking and making connections and just getting out to shows, even if they're digital ones, if you maybe can't travel, and just make sure you take advantage of every opportunity to connect, because even if it doesn't work now, that connection you made today might pay off in 5, 6 years time, for example. So yeah, that would just be something I would say as well from my years on the pitch. But thank you all to all of you. Thank you, Cassia, to Theo, to Josh, Des, and Mark. That was brilliant. Really, really great panel. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Sophia, for being a great host.